Hey, it's JK. So the Elden Ring DLC is finally here. Shadow of the Erdtree comes with a lot of new toys to play with, but of course there's one in particular that you know I've had my eye on. Seeing this, and being that I am a guy who's used throwing knives only in every FromSoft game, it only felt right to do my first playthrough of Shadow of the Erdtree using only throwing knives. This includes any of the consumable variety we used in the base game video, plus the new throwing knives weapon. Was this a bad idea for a first playthrough? Probably. One particular boss was likely the hardest thing I've done in any challenge run. I imagine you can guess what it was. But more on the complete destruction of my sanity later. Let's prepare for this once-in-a-lifetime event. In Mohg's boss room, in a blood-drunk haze, sleeping in an egg for most of my days, we touch Miquella's dangling arm and instantly get transported to a new location. I thought it was a bit odd that there wasn't an actual cutscene here, but still walking out into this field and catching sight of all these graves is a pretty epic moment. Hopefully it will be plain sailing from here on. I grabbed the first map piece and figured I'd test out the trusty fan daggers against this enemy here. As expected, he has a lot of health and dodged the hell out of our knife arsenal. It took a lot to bring him down, and if this is what a normal enemy looks like, then I think we're going to need to improve our ammo situation. Now, I didn't really look up anything on this playthrough, apart from one thing: the location of the weapon we want to use. So we speed across this bridge, run past these blood friends, and head into the ruined forge. As much as I'd lava to take in the scenery, I do a bit of a sprint to finally grab our prize, the Smith's Grip Dagger. This weapon is basically throwing knives but with no ammo limit. So it goes without saying that we upgrade this all the way to plus 25 right away, and then go back to test them on that first enemy. With each R1, you throw two knives which do okay damage, I guess. Not amazing, but the big issue I've noticed, which will definitely play a part in this run, is the range. It's actually deceptively short. Often it feels like it should be hitting, but it doesn't. I really hope that the range doesn't get increased with a patch that drops a few days after I finish this run. Oh, what the fuck, at least it still is fast and spammable, so definitely will help end the knives of our enemies. I decided to give it a bleed infusion, but damn, the bleed amount we get is pretty terrible, one of the worst I've seen for any weapon. Oh, and in case you were wondering, NPC-type enemies still dodge the hell out of our projectile knives. I sure hope there isn't a mandatory NPC gank fight in this DLC. The weapon also has an Ashevor that throws the knife further and does more damage, but it costs FP and I can use Kukri for long-range shots anyway, which have good bleed, so I never really use this. Lastly, before we begin, I did a quick respec to take some points from strength and put them into vigor, as judging by that first enemy, things are gonna hit pretty hard here. We ventured to the eastern area of this part of the map, easily taking out some innocent bystanders and a hot dog. We encountered a big knight here with a literal door for a shield who was pulling some Radahn type moves, but didn't really like the cut of our jib. In the church beyond, we grab our first items of the new leveling system, the Scadutree fragments that increase our damage and reduce damage taken, something that will really help the run along. Nearby, I found a mausoleum containing our first boss, who unfortunately was an NPC type enemy. This Black Knight was pretty agile, and the damage we did to him was, not great. But of course his damage to us was monstrous. Okay, to be fair, we're not wearing armor, but still. Out of interest, I tried with some armor and a more defensive setup, but honestly I don't really know how much difference this made. Because this was my first playthrough, there's a few moments in this run where I encountered a boss and ended up coming back to it as I wanted to explore other options first. This is what happened with that knight, and also this furnace decided to burn us. But down what I assume was the intended route, we grab more Scadutree fragments and head up beyond this giant door where we get attacked by Nazca's cousins. These guys know how to hold a grudge. We make our way up to Belarut Tower Settlement, where the locals gave us a warm welcome. If they thought we'd go down easy though, they were in for a Belarut awakening. I was still finding the fan daggers to be the most effective damage-wise, especially up close, so a combination of the two would be necessary. We at last arrived at the boss of the area, and let me tell ya, this guy was not going to take our invasion of his home lying down. This is an interesting boss fight, if a bit chaotic. I cast Golden Vow and Flame grant me strength before entering the arena. By doing this, we can smash in a lot of fan daggers during the opening section of the fight. The damage they do is actually kinda good because of the fact that he's a big target and thus easy to hit with all 5 daggers. The difficulty comes in the second phase where the onslaught of attacks picks up. Here, I switched to the Poison Bone darts, the poison helping to keep his HP ticking down when I couldn't attack. I now switch to a combination of the Smith's Grip dagger and the kukri, depending on how near or far the boss was from me. I had a couple of near-death experiences here, but just about managed to recover. I never actually managed to get a bleed proc, but thankfully I survived long enough and got the damage in, causing this beast to breathe its divinal breath. Boss 1 is down on the 5th attempt. The way beyond the boss appears to be blocked, so I guess we need to explore elsewhere. But not before taking revenge on this guy! For the moment, I put my Smith's Grip back to standard infusion because I feel like the bleed didn't really help in the last fight, so opted just for extra damage. This time, I felt like I got a better grasp of this guy's moves, but I also discovered something awesome. On enemies susceptible to headshots, the jump heavy attack of the knives pretty much always lands one if you're in the right position, also allowing for stagger locks. This was still a long drawn out near 8-minute fight, but with enough patience, Slave Knight Jail is defeated. I also found a minor dungeon nearby, Belarut Jail, which I believe contains what the jar guys look like on the inside. Put some pants on, man, Jesus! The boss here was a classic Moonveil spammer, who wasn't too difficult once I figured out his moveset. My favourite thing was timing the kukri just right so it knocks him out of mid-air. Easy boss, kind of fun, but at least it gave a decent amount of runes unlike those base game minor dungeons. Seriously, who programmed that? What was not really very fun was the dragon outside. It's got a cool design, and Ghost Flame is a neat idea for a dragon, but its moveset is very similar to the dragons in the base game, meaning it was pretty easy because we can hit the head with knives, but its health bar was huge, so it took forever. But even worse than that was the Furnace Golem, who I actually regret killing because it wasn't worth it for our build, and gave very few runes compared to the time it took to bring this thing down. Our damage was pretty poor. His moves are super easy to avoid, it just took forever. But anyway, he's Fern history now. Let's move on to some fun stuff. Exploring some of the higher lands to the east, I found some new loot and got attacked by some very aggressive sheep. Anybody seen episode 5 of the new season of The Boys? It seems our next path is back across the giant bridge, where I encountered some fans who had a burning desire to meet me. I appreciate the passion, even if I don't agree with the approach. Somehow, I actually missed the giant castle right in front of the bridge, and ended up taking a side route finding this talisman talking about a big scary dragon. Guess I'm fighting that later. I also discovered unlockable spirit springs here, which led me high upward to the fort of Reprimand. Upon exploring, I was greeted by this knight with some familiar looking wings. Unfortunately, I had read his movements wrong, got cornered and died on my first attempt. But guess what? Turns out he can be headshot. His head was really red, with blood. This greatly reduced the difficulty of the fight, and he went down in no time at all. He does indeed drop the crucible wings as you might expect, but unfortunately this was probably the biggest disappointment for me. Perhaps I had unrealistic expectations, but when I saw this in the trailer, I had envisioned flying into the air and raining down knives on my opponents, but sadly it's just a very disappointing flying poke. Oh well. After sneaking past a Ghost Flame Dragon and finding a fog gate that I couldn't enter for some reason, I then found another ruined forge. These dungeons are unique in that they don't have bosses in them, but this one turned out to be very worthwhile because it contained the smithing talisman, which boosts the damage of all throwing weapons by 10%, and essential for our build. After grabbing some more fragments nearby, getting the finger from this old man in a church, and serving this fire knight some queeline pie, I at last made it to the next big dungeon, Shadow Keep. Hey, I wonder what that thing is. Oh. So, the Golden Hippopotamus isn't the most complex of bosses, but it does have two things which make it challenging, at least for me here. First, the damage from some of the attacks is insane. I was wearing the Ritual Shield talisman, and this still one-shot me. The second is the room is quite small, and you can end up stuck in a corner like this where the camera just really ruins your day. Thankfully, this beastie is hit-prone to status effects, so poison and bleed work to a degree. Fan daggers are still dealing some great damage here though. For phase 2, where he gets a bit prickly, the poison really comes in clutch. Make sure not to get caught by the grab, because that's a real bad time. Random thought, but anyone think this feels a bit like something from Monster Hunter? Once again, I really struggled to get a bleed proc here. Perhaps I need to level Arcane more? In any case, we managed to get it done, taking advantage of any golden opportunities to attack, and after about 6 or 7 attempts, this hippo gets laid to rest. It was only now that I realised that I had completely missed that castle from earlier, Castle Ensis. Told you this run was a bit all over the place. The castle itself was pretty straightforward, but the boss, however, was a real step up. This Twin Moon Knight attacks so swiftly, it's hard to Rellanalyze her attacks. The first time she pulled off the moon attack, I had no idea what to do and died instantly. I wonder if anyone figured out what to do with that on the first time they saw it. If you don't avoid the first part, you can't dodge the rest, so it's pretty much an instant game over. At least for my naked green body anyway. My strategy for this fight was to apply buffs, and then try and hit as many close-up fan daggers as possible in the earliest part of the fights where the openings are a little bit more frequent. With all the fan daggers exhausted, we moved to the poison bone darts to get a poison proc which she thankfully doesn't have an immunity to, bringing her into phase 2. For this final part, I focused solely on the jumping attack with my keen smith script daggers, although reproc the poison at one point when it wore off. After dodging a slew of projectiles and jumping the moons again, one final jump heavy ends this one. What an awesome fight. Speaking of moons though, I'm hoping it won't be many moons until we hit 100,000 subscribers. Many watching my videos here aren't subscribed, so if you fancy helping out the channel, please consider hitting that button so I can cringe my son out with the YouTube plaque. I appreciate you all. Now, I actually could level up here and decided to stick some points into endurance, as stamina was pretty crucial. The Smith Script dagger uses more stamina than you might think. Before heading back to Shadowkeep, I wanted to do a bit more exploring. In some wilderness by the water, I found a boss that I just knew this DLC would have, one that was likely going to be unbearable. If you were expecting this bear to have huge hitboxes and high damage, then you would be exactly right. Before tackling it, I found the Piercing Throw Ash of War. This is the standard Ash of War that I mentioned for the Smith Script daggers, but it'll allow me to more easily access infusions for them. Anyway, back to Ralva the bear. So, although it looks intimidating, the bear actually can be pretty easily staggered with headshots from basically anything, even if it's just one knife of the fan daggers, and given the bear's head is at the same level as us, hitting it was actually pretty easy. We even got a poise break, one of the only ones I got in the whole run. A couple of jump attacks, and we leave this boss dead and buried. He dropped the red bear pelt, which I actually decided to wear for a bit because it just looks funny. Anyhow, I think it's probably time to go back to Shadowkeep. We explore, finding some talismans, a consumable version of Golden Vow, which is pretty cool I guess. There's also a lot of enemies here, and because I'm not limited ammo-wise thanks to the Smith Script daggers, I take the time fighting stuff. I'm really enjoying using these for clearing levels. While exploring, unlocking shortcuts and such, I found this coffin which led down to a completely new area. This route was long, I won't cover it in full as there wasn't much of note, but I eventually ended up at the Darklight catacombs, aka Tomb of the Giants if it was a catacombs. On the bright side, there is actually a way to turn on the lights in here. But on the negative, you've got cannon shooting imps and mages shooting machine guns which can go through walls. This catacombs was long as well. It felt like it went on forever, but it did make up for it with this tremendous scene. I actually laughed out loud when I entered into this room to be greeted by what I knew was a giant cannon imp. I spent a long time taking this giant cannon imp out, only to be rewarded with a totally useless ghost glovewort. At least I had a blast doing it. But one thing I did not have a blast doing was fighting this god-awful boss at the end of the catacombs, Jory the Elder Inquisitor. You just knew there was going to be an annoying gank fight somewhere in the DLC, but this one also adds projectile spamming, including an attack that hits 10 times wherever you're standing in the arena. Really, this fight is an endurance test more than anything. Staying alive and waiting for rare opportunities to attack. The beginning phase is less bad for this, but once he's below half health and Jory starts summoning Smo's mum to invade your personal space, things get pretty uncomfortable pretty quickly. Probably my least favourite fight so far, but thanks to a combination of poison and good timing, we finally put this guy down. The only thing I'm inquisitive about is why FromSoft felt the need to make this boss fight. But here's a shocking twist. There's another way out of Jory's boss room. It actually leads to a completely new area, the Abyssal Woods. As far as I know, even now, this is the only way to get to this area of the map. If there is another way that you found, let me know in the comments. But I didn't really want to venture into a whole new area just yet when I was halfway through Shadowkeep, so I opted to return there and come back to this now that I had the grace. Plus, I was still a bit salty about the Jory fight. Back in Shadowkeep, we got burned multiple times and made it to the specimen storehouse. I gotta say, the scale and scope of this dungeon is incredible. I think one of the best FromSoft have ever made. I took a turn at one point and found another new area, the ancient ruins of Rao. It's almost overwhelming how much stuff there is to explore. I finally found a lever to pull, moving the scenery to allow me to climb up higher and higher, and at last I reached a closed door with a grace right outside it. This surely had to be the boss. An epic cutscene to open, but what was he doing in here before I arrived? Was he literally just sat here in the dark? I soon learned exactly why he's earned the title of Impaler. This felt like a huge difficulty spike. He flies around at high speed, his movements are truly mesmerizing. Fan daggers also no longer seem to be getting the job done. I tried a few different things at this point, including respeccing for more arcane. I also learned that the Smith script daggers can't be buffed with greases or Bloodflame blade. I tried an intelligence build with Frost, but I just kept hitting the same problem. I suck at dodging his attacks. After quite a few deaths, I decided I'd go explore some other options first and maybe find some more Scadutree fragments. We'll get him, don't you worry. Might as well go check out those Abyssal Woods we found earlier. This area turned out to be one of the most atmospheric areas in the whole game, maybe the series. Torrent bucks you off as you enter and disappears. Try to summon him again, and it says he's too scared. This suggests something bad is about to happen. Well, at least for now, there's just these nice friendly sheep. Ah, why are their eyes glowing? We also encountered this Madding Hand NPC, but I don't know if he was bugged or something, but he just kept walking left and right until we handed him a defeat. Easiest NPC fight I've done on a throwing knife run. I managed to get the map piece and some more Scadutree fragments. I'm up to level 11 now in case you're wondering. But the scariest part of this area now begins. You encounter this enemy which... Okay, let's call a spade a spade. This is very much a Winter Lantern from Bloodborne. Inflicts a deadly status effect just by looking at you, and can basically insta-kill you. But these guys actually can't be hurt at all. I would later find out you can actually make them vulnerable by parrying and riposting them, but of course that wouldn't have helped me here with my build. So, sneaking through was the only way. I'm so shooketh right now. Thankfully, I only encountered 3 of them, and after getting by them and some jury impersonators, we at last made it to what I assume is the main dungeon of the area, an immense building home to someone called Midra. Wonder who that is. The house itself is a clever mix of moving bookcases, hidden rooms, and treasures galore. After making it through, we find a room where it looks like someone's in pain. I actually thought it was just going to be a boss fight right away, but this little guy tries to attack us. He of course goes down easy. But then we're greeted by a gruesome as hell cutscene where he pulls out this giant spike from within himself, destroying his own head, but revealing him to be the Lord of Frenzied Flame. This guy seems to have an absolutely enormous amount of health, and of course he's a formidable opponent. A very cool boss, and actually behaves differently to a lot of the Elden Ring boss fights. At this point, I felt like I was getting killed pretty easily, so I went and farmed to get myself 60 vigor, as given this was my very first playthrough of the DLC, I wanted to give myself leeway to learn the boss's attacks. Given I'd gotten more Scadutree levels, I decided to go give Messmer another try. I did do better here, and actually did manage to bring him to phase 2 for the first time, but I still wasn't quite there yet, and he once again kicked me out of his serpent house. I felt like, given the difficulty of the bosses and the low damage of the knives, I need to be able to survive more attacks while I learn the fights, so getting as many Scadutree levels as I could would probably be beneficial. There was still one more area of the map remaining I hadn't gone to, so after some exploring around the river, I found the entrance to the absolutely stunning Cerulean coast. I found the map piece, got the relevant fragments, and then entered the giant fissure in the southern part of this area. With laser shooting enemies and explosions galore, death was a for sure thing if I wasn't careful. I spent a while killing this large blob, and then this spirit misbegotten for not really much reward at all before I arrived at what I was pretty sure was the end of the area. A long drop, and then we're greeted by the Putrescent Knight, who promptly putrescent me back to the grace with a swift death. After getting walled by Messmer and Midra, I didn't want to leave a third boss here, so I was determined to persist until victory. I'd initially tried with bleed, but I never managed to get a single bleed proc, so I went with an occult infusion instead. The main challenges are the really delayed attacks and also the blue flame waves in the second phase. At this time, I actually did opt to put some armor on, mainly to help with the damage but also the frostbite. I didn't feel at this time that the extra damage from Blue Dancer Charm was worth the increased damage I was taking. Whether it actually made a difference or not was kinda hard to say, but what I can tell you is for some reason this was one of the longest fights of the whole run, and strangely, I actually found it pretty fun. Quite a few of these attacks, once you get the timings down, are quite satisfying to dodge. The crazy attack where he separates from his horse is particularly so, and does leave a decent attack window afterwards. The blue flame attack he does as part of the phase transition can be dodged by jumping, but I don't feel like it's particularly clear when you have to jump, and it felt like luck whether I avoided the third wave or not. I also feel like he spams this attack too often. In the last 2 minutes of the fight, he used this attack a total of 4 times, which felt really overkill, but other than that, this fight was a fun challenge. And with no Estus left, he used the separation attack again, and after dodging it completely, I landed the finishing shots to pierce his skin and turned him from a silent knight into a holy knight. This flower woman then tries to indoctrinate us, but I was kinda tired by this point, so went for a nap instead. I did another catacombs after this, but I'm not actually going to cover any more minor dungeons in this run, as we'll be doing another video where we focus on them. I also did a bit of exploring in the ruins of Rao we found earlier, grabbing some Scadutree fragments and unlocking some graces, but I felt like I could put it off no longer. It was time for me to go back and try to take down Messmer. I had decided now to focus on bleed, using the bleed-infused Smith Script dagger despite its low bleed proc in combination with the kukri for long-distance shots and the poison bone knives for a bit of extra chip damage. This went a lot better, and I actually managed to get my head around dodging his attacks. Our damage was still pretty low. The only time I saw yellow was when I got the eventual bleed proc, of which there were 3 on the winning attempt. This certainly still wasn't easy, but getting my head around his attacks made this quite enjoyable at last. The aftermath of the jump attacks he does were the best windows for damage, and I got kinda lucky in that I got my second bleed proc just as phase 1 ended. Weirdly, phase 2 was actually easier for me. I think in part because the only new attacks were the snake ones, which were mostly easy to dodge and had big windows for my attacks at the end. I say mostly because I feel like I got lucky avoiding this madness here. When I got the third bleed proc near the end of his health bar, my heart was racing. I dodged his snake and unleashed a barrage of knives, praying it would be enough, and thankfully it was. The colour had drained from my face. I was definitely impaler than I was when I started this fight, but we got it done. I actually managed to level up Arcane and decided it was time to get some more appropriate fashion than this drab samurai outfit. Much better. Behold and be mesmerized by my beauty. But it turns out I was not yet done with Shadowkeep. There was a route on the map I hadn't explored yet, and it turns out it leads to the church district below Shadowkeep. This actually ended leading all the way up to the loft area of Shadowkeep, only to then lead me all the way back down to an area called Scaduview. Oh hey, who's that guy? Ah! So this Gaius was tough, no doubt about it. His charge attack really bores into your very soul. The best way I found to dodge it was rolling forwards and to the right just as he's coming at you. The timing is pretty tight still, but most of the other attacks he uses weren't too tough to dodge. A lot of them actually have fairly decent windows. He does hit hard though. I was at blessing level 15 and many of these attacks were taking off over half my health. It was difficult to keep consistent hits on him for bleed procs. In fact, I only got 2 the whole fight, and one was literally right at the end when he had a sliver of health left anyway. Many people I think find this fight abhorrent, but I kinda liked it. At least it wasn't boring. Okay, these jokes are getting a bit boorish now. So, beyond him you can actually find 5 Scadutree fragments, but I actually opted not to use them. I felt like 15 was a decent enough level, and I was feeling confident in my abilities now after the earlier slaughter. So let's see how we get on. Throughout all this, I had actually forgotten that there's another big boss we found but didn't come back to yet. So back into the madness of Midra's boss fight we go. Compared to the other bosses, Midra feels like he has a lot more health. Maybe that's just me, but also his attacks aren't anywhere near as relentless as the other bosses. He kinda reminds me a bit of a Dark Souls 3 boss. That's not to say you can't die if you get careless though. His attacks feel fair and satisfying to avoid, and I like that they didn't go too crazy with the madness status effect in this fight. Even the AoE attack is easy enough to avoid. Keeping at Midra range works best for me here. He seems to be the most susceptible to bleed of any of the bosses, as we get the quickest bleed proc at the start here. I found that right at the beginning, he always does the same attack, so it's easy to get close and dodge random once to give yourself an opening, as he can't turn that quickly. The spinning attack is also easy enough to get around for free damage, and you can even get some shots in when he pauses midway. It was still a long fight, clocking in at nearly 10 minutes just because of how large his health is, but scoring the third bleed proc as he was on low health was pretty clutch, and even though I was in clear danger here, I took a risk and threw a frenzy of knives to cause this human torch to flame out. We're making some good progress at last. Back in the ruins of Rao, there was a boss here which you can probably guess from the scenery, likes to use Scarlet Rot. I'd actually picked up the immunizing Horn Charm +2 earlier, so I felt equipping this might help me out. The boss is of course a classic FromSoft trope, a woman with an insect body for her lower half. What are you, Romina? We haven't seen this since Dark Souls 2. So, this boss is really cool. I like the design and a lot of the attacks feel pretty fair to avoid. If I had to give a criticism, in the final phases of the fight, she seemed to spam the flying attack and butterfly AoE a few too many times for my liking, meaning the fight probably went on a couple minutes longer than it should have done. I did actually die a couple times from losing concentration right near the finish, but other than that, this was not as difficult as Gaius or Messmer. She seemed to have similar bleed resistance to Midra, by which I mean not that much, so that helped, although due to aforementioned attacks in the latter part of the fight, getting consistent hits in wasn't the easiest. Once again, we got one right at the end, allowing me to take the risk and run through the butterflies to land the finishing blow, allowing us to say flutter bye to this butterfly. Using the item we got from Messmer, we can burn the ceiling tree that lies beyond Romina. My guess is that this leads to the final dungeon of the DLC. It's nice to have that open, but I do know there are some more big bosses we want to tackle before we head there. I thought that one of them was going to be in this other building in the ruins of Rao I hadn't managed to get to yet. After wandering around for ages, I at last found the hidden elevator that eventually leads there. What was the reward for finding this pretty obscure route, you might ask? A reskin of the first boss, but now with added Deathblight breath and Basilisk summoning. Why Miyazaki? I'm not going to give this boss much time in the video, because he doesn't deserve it. Let's just say he kept Falion around, I threw knives at him, he died, and I forgot about his existence almost instantly up until the point I had to write about it in the script here. Let's move on. So, time to clear up these other remembrance bosses. Firstly, let's go check out the finger runes that guy was talking about a while ago. This area is kind of disappointingly empty. The only thing to do here is whatever that is. Am I going to get demonetized for that? At least I didn't give anyone the finger. Oh, hey, an actually useful talisman. I had this equipped for most of the rest of the run. We head back to this guy cradling his finger baby? Why do I get the feeling this guy is a bit underhanded? So as I mentioned, I didn't really look anything up on this run apart from how to get the daggers at the beginning, but I was completely stumped on how to get to the other finger runes, so I did end up looking that up as well. Turns out, you need to get this random gesture near Bonnie Village, and then use it here, the statue just by the grace before Commander Gaius. Classic FromSoft. Now the area beyond here looks beautiful initially, but it might be the most disappointing part of the DLC for me. You're greeted instantly by 2 tree sentinels and then a falling star beast, both of which went down easy, but why did we need more base game copy-paste? There's basically nothing else in this whole area, which is a shame because it was the area on the map I was instantly intrigued by when I saw it. They could have handled this area better. Anyway, I stick my face right into this finger's hole and don't even leave it my digits afterwards. Returning to the cathedral, this guy hands us a third map, and guess what? It points to below this cathedral. We find he's gone when we return, and there's a secret access point underneath his throne, leading to the third finger rune. Sword Hand of Knight Anna invades us for an epic PvP style showdown. I'm definitely going to have to go get checked after this. I mean, this seems very unhygienic. Oh my god, what is that? I'll tell you what it is. It's the worst boss in the DLC. It's not even because it's that difficult. It's the only boss where I could just not figure out how to avoid certain attacks. This boss is actually very weak to bleed, it seems. I was able to get 2 procs in the first 60 seconds of the fight, bringing it down to half health already. But Phase 2 brings in some pretty annoying hard to avoid attacks, like the Beyblade spin attack, as well as summoning loads more little hands, along with the multi-laser attacks and the jumping around like it's taken amphetamines. But by far the most annoying attack is the large rotating black hole laser. Once the first rotation happens, you can walk in between Metyr's force field and the laser easily, but the first laser is too close to the force field for that to work. I tried multiple different approaches to avoiding this, running around the other way, running far enough away, dodging into the laser, but nothing I did seemed to work. I've looked at other videos since, and still have yet to see anyone avoid that first rotation, apart from using stuff like Raptor of the Mists. If you know of a way, let me know in the comments below. I did manage to win, but it was extremely close. The slams were still the best time to attack after, as well as the big slow smaller laser beam. I got a bleed proc literally right at the end, and thankfully that finished the fight just as I was about to die. This sucked. Trash boss. Let's get as many kilometers away from here as possible. Oh yay, I actually got a level up. Back in the church district, one of my peers had mentioned that you could drain the water here, so I searched and found the lever for it. A short trip downwards takes us to the Scadutree base and the next boss, the Scadutree Avatar by James Cameron. I saw a lot of people saying this boss was awful and hating on it, and yeah, I can see why, I don't blame you. But for me, this was actually the easiest of the big bosses by far, and I think that was all down to one feature the knives have. I can guarantee hitting the head. I can imagine doing this melee would be really annoying and would end with a lot of hits whiffing. But the damage I get from these headshots is... I mean, look at that, I'm actually seeing yellow with normal R1s. Yeah, this thing has annoying attacks, but it felt like a quick fight and we tore through its health quickly, and soon the Scadutree way of water meets the way of knives. Looking to clear up anything left on the map, I needed to figure out how to get to that big old mountain in the bottom right. I got invaded by this ancient dragon man who went down easily, only for me to find what I guess is his real form in the bottom of a nearby cave. When I saw that there was another exit to his boss room, I knew I was on the right track. The route was starting to drag on a little bit, but I made it to the bottom of Jagged Peak. The Drake waiting here for us was far from peak content because it was pretty similar to the dragons in the base game, but with some jagged lightning attacks. We found a dragon priestess who told us that she wanted us to kill Bayle on behalf of Placidusax, and I was happy to oblige. Now, I have to say, this lead up to Bayle's boss fight was one of the best things I think I've seen across the whole series. Okay, ignoring this dumb Lanciax reskin, that is. But after that, the intense imagery with the sky, the countless corpses of dead dragons, the amber lightning striking down repeatedly, breathtaking. Also, I have to mention this guy, who I gone all the way back down the mountain to speak to. I'm not actually going to beat the fight summoning him, but you should definitely summon him at least once just to hear his dialogue.
Curse you, Bayle! I hereby vow you will prove this day. Behold, a true Drake warrior, and I, Egon, your fear made flesh.
Amazing. So anyway, Christian Bayle likes to swoop in and say, "I'm Batman." This for me was the second hardest fight of the whole run. I do have the slight advantage again that I'm able to hit the head, but the damage is still pretty low, and also it seems like he had very high bleed resistance, probably from that batsuit armor. I didn't even bother with poison bone darts because I tried it and it took a huge amount of them to proc it even once. Phase 1 is, I guess I could call it fairly smooth. I still get struck by what appears to be a bit of a bad hitbox with his breath, but if you get close as he's firing his breath, it's a great window to attack the head. Phase 2 though, things get very chaotic. His crazy carpet bombing attack still feels very difficult to avoid, and the windows to get hits him become smaller and smaller. The kukri helped to damage from a distance and keep what little bleed I was proccing going. I won't sugarcoat it, this was a rough fight for me. I made a lot of mistakes, and I still absolutely bricked it anytime he did this attack, surviving by really narrow margins on a couple of occasions. Honestly, I didn't feel like I won here, I felt like I survived. With no Estus left, he thankfully dashed towards me to turn around and shoot his breath in the other direction, and I spammed knives into his face. I was lucky here, because after 6 minutes of slogging away, I finally got the second bleed proc, which was just enough to put an end to this monstrous fight. I really expected this attempt to end in failure, but I overcame my sense of dread and scored the win. So we're on the home stretch. We can finally enter Anir Ilim, the last dungeon of the DLC. Before we can get to the final boss though, we have an unfortunate challenge in our way which I alluded to earlier. A mandatory NPC fight. So this was about what you'd expect really. The one advantage I had here over Fia's champions in the base game is my jump heavy. The general strategy was to lure them in for an attack, jump backwards, and do the heavy. It was a slow process, but they dodged my normal attack, so what you gonna do? With the last NPC remaining, I led her towards me, jumped, and toothpicked her right in the skull. This entire sequence of fighting went on for 11 minutes, and was pretty damn tedious, but at least I got it on the second attempt and didn't have to repeat it. So, this is it. The final boss of the DLC. Promised Consort Radahn. How's this gonna go? This boss, what even is this? Easily one of the hardest, if not the hardest things I've ever done in a challenge run. Phase 1 is not too bad. Sure, he hits hard and there are some nasty roll catches, but I was able to consort him out without too much issue. The second phase, however, between the light speed attacks, the beams of light, the fact he can cancel his attacks and change to a different combo at the drop of a hat, plus the sheer length of the fight from the low damage I was doing, leading to my heart pounding like crazy in the later moments, this was an unreal onslaught. I was stuck on this boss for 3 days. 3 days of trying to make sense of a visual sensory overload. 3 days of questioning myself as to whether I could actually do this. 3 days wondering if this was the thing that finally ended the journey of the knives, my hubris of thinking doing this for my first playthrough of the DLC was a good idea. I was driven nearly to madness. Many would probably have given up at this point, used a great shield, summoned Metyr, anything, but my foolish, misguided pride would not allow me to. Radahn beat me into the ground mercilessly, seemingly solely focused on crushing my hope and resolve. You're probably asking yourself, watching this, why continue? Why put yourself through this? Well, the truth is, I live for this shit. Oh, hold on a sec. Much better. Thanks all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you fancy subscribing, we're so close to 100,000 subscribers, and of course, please do like the video and comment as well. I need to go lie down now. Until next time, I've been JK Leeds. Have a good one, and see ya.